I am Charlotte. People say a woman scorned is dangerous. They never meant it kindly. They imagine keening, a late-night scream, knives in kitchen drawers. I did none of that. I made a different pact with myself, that the world would not recognize the pain that had been done to me, but it would remember the consequence. That consequence would be quiet, inevitable, and clean. Revenge, I decided, should be like illness. Slow, internal, and finally obvious to everyone else. Ethan had been good at small cruelties that felt like accidents. He would forget to tell me about the weekend plans he made with his friends until I found the receipts in an email. He would compliment me in a way that implied I was lucky. Never the other way around. He was handsome in the way people stop remembering the why of something once they are used to looking at it. He worked in mid-level project management at a tech firm downtown. He wore soft blazers and expensive trainers, and he had a laugh that preferred not to be interrupted. I loved him. The love of someone who gets used to a rhythm, who learns the cadence of another person's small comedy and begins to write their own. And he cheated. I know the moment that knowledge became a physical thing. The way the phone felt heavier when I picked it up, the way the room's air found a new temperature. Her name was Anna Green. She was a junior designer at his company. I read the messages like a foreign language and found, sentence by sentence, how prolific was the vocabulary of betrayal. I can't stop thinking about you. When are you coming by? I wish you were here now. The evidence was not cinematic. It was pedestrian and domestic. Messages at 3 a.m, a photo of a dish they had eaten together, a few lines of affectionate names. But the intimacy they shared had the gravity of a polished lie. I did not collapse theatrically. I sat there until dawn and composed myself the way one composes a letter, with repetition and care. The first thing I did was not to shout, not to smash. The first thing I did was to think, to chart a course. If he had wanted me to be small, to plead and to beg, then I would give him none of it. If he had wanted spectacle, he would get only the opposite. The invisible, the strategic dismantling of the self he had so comfortably built. I wrote a new rule for myself then. Never act when your hands shake. Wait. Watch. Learn. He was talented at assuming goodwill. That would be part of the weaponry. I started with his routine. Ethan left his phone on the hall console every night when he came in. He liked to scroll one last time before sleep, to read the news and ignore me as I brushed my teeth. I learned to wait for the silhouette of his silhouette in the doorway, for the creak at 9:45. Once he left it unattended, I borrowed it, not to fling accusations but to gather facts. Who were his contacts? When was he free? What names kept appearing? I catalogued everything. Locations, phrases, times. I was surgical. I photographed a few screenshots with my own phone and then returned his device to the exact place, making sure none of those things could be traced back to me. He thought the betrayal was small, perhaps only a fling. Men like that survive on small comforts and tidy narratives. They can be convinced that a messy truth is actually a choice, incidental. That was a miscalculation. I began with the network. Friends, colleagues, his family. Not to shame them, shame is messy and noisy, but to shift them. Plant seeds. I called his mother first, because mothers have a unique appetite for precision. Is Ethan seeing anyone? I asked, deceptively casual, while the kettle boiled in my apartment. She told me about seminars, networking drinks. She mentioned Anna's name with the sort of neutral curiosity that mothers use when sorting school supply lists. I did not tell her what I knew. I wanted to observe, to see how she would react when the puzzle fell into place. To his colleagues, I became the supportive girlfriend in absentia, the one who cared about his career. Ethan mentioned the new design brief. I'd say casually at a company outing, asking about Anna's role. People responded the way people do when they are comfortable. Information came out like steam. The small lunches, the after-work coffees. I did not overtly accuse. I collected. Then came the psychological work. The parts one knew would hurt him more than any scream. Men who cheat often keep the cheater's secret in a separate pocket of their life. They make little rituals to maintain it. A hidden browser, a sleeping arrangement, the careful deletion of timestamps. They need that secret to be clean. My plan depended on making the secret messy in a way that suggested incompetence rather than malice. I would weaponize embarrassment and reputation, not physical damage. I wanted him to feel exposure in the social spaces where he felt safe. First, I built an alibi. I began to behave in ways that would cover any suspicious absence. I started volunteering at a community library twice a week and joined a Saturday pottery class. Friends noticed and complimented me on how engaged I was. I also deliberately turned down invitations to his work events, citing exhaustion and a busy morning at the library. He learned to exist without my presence at everything. Ironically, that made him bolder. Without me watching, he moved with a new laxity. Next, I reintegrated his rumors. People believe what confirms the context they already carry. I crafted casual corroborated stories. Small truths folded into fiction. At brunch with his colleagues, I would let loose a story about a brand I had been eyeing, about a trip I had planned to a design exhibition. It was plausible. Later, the colleagues would tell Ethan about the pottery class I had joined. He would shrug and mention Anna as an afterthought over beers. That was the mistake. The assumption that social mention is inert. My assault was psychological, but it also required precision in timing. I understood that the most effective undermining of someone's self is to make them doubt their competence and their control. For weeks, I became a curator of small disruptions. I began sending him emails from an address he did not recognize. Anonymous compliments that referenced his projects, questions about deadlines. I watched him answer them with the blended arrogance and helpfulness he always showed. He took pride in being useful. He replied to the unknown with a generosity that made him an accomplice to his own unraveling. The crucial phase arrived when I orchestrated a breach in his digital hygiene. Ethan was careless about backups. He saved files on the cloud and used the same memorable password for his home router. I did not hack. I simply exploited human predictability. I reset a benign element of his digital life. A shared playlist on the streaming service we used, renamed a song so that he would notice nothing at first but would later. The small acts were the mortar of my plan. The act of breaking his privacy for me was not enjoyment. It was an ethical calculus I had made. I would not cross certain lines. No financial ruin, no physical harm, no public humiliation that could injure innocence. My revenge was to be surgical. I wanted him to look around a well-lit room and understand that the people he trusted, colleagues, the people who liked his Instagram posts, could slowly, quietly see a version of him that he had been careful to hide. There were small lies I told his lover too, though I never approached her directly at first. I found Anna on social media. A bright profile, creative posts, friendly selfies. Instead of a confrontation, I started to mirror. I liked the same art she liked, left a thoughtful comment under a post about typography, and, crucially, sent a private message as if from a mutual professional contact. "Hi Anna," it read. "Would love your input on a speculative portfolio piece." She responded, professional, and perhaps flattered by the attention. Over the next few weeks we corresponded. I learned her cadence, the way she wrote, the nervousness at being young and visible in a male-dominated place. I learned she had moved to the city 2 years ago and found this job as a foothold. Not ambition with sharp edges, but a tender, fearful progress. She believed, like so many people, that her heart could be a private place untouched by office politics. I felt something for her in the way one feels for naive people who have yet to cross certain thresholds. But sympathy could not undo the fact that she had, knowingly or not, been an instrument in a betrayal. Finally, I made contact. Not to attack but to propose something that would change the dynamics. "We have a mutual project browse," I told her. "Would you like to meet for coffee and look at portfolios?" Anna agreed. When we met, she arrived with that nervousness, and I sat across from her and smiled like a woman offering help. I learned how to be friendly while cataloging details. Names, the colleagues she admired, the time she left work. She told me about Ethan without shame, just beaming at the way he spoke about mentorship. I listened. I learned. Then I played a quiet card. I told her about a shadow that sometimes sits in offices. A rumor, I said, about a manager playing favorites. I described, in the neutral language of someone telling a cautionary tale, how reputations get tarnished by gossip. "It's awful," I said. "People's careers can be ruined because of something small." I watched her eyes flicker. That was the moment I sowed uncertainty. My real stroke was social engineering in daylight. I started a rumor not as a scream but as a seed planted by multiple hands. I made little truths and let them devolve. At an office holiday party, perhaps the most treacherous social environment for someone with secrets, I was invited because Ethan asked me to come along with his work friends, though he expected me to be pleasant and invisible. I did not shout. I smiled, held a glass, traded platitudes. When he danced with Anna, as he did that night under the dim, unremarkable movement, no one thought it odd. It was his bravery, and the room applauded it. Afterward, I enacted the quietest coup. A fake anonymous complaint to HR about inappropriate relationships creating conflicts of interest. I wrote it as if from a concerned employee reporting favoritism. The complaint referenced nothing illegal, only that a manager seemed to give certain junior staff special consideration. I phrased it so that it sounded plausible. Budgets, allocation of tasks, a shadow advantage. HR woke up to the complaint the following week and professionally started to look into project pairings. They did what they always do. Emails, recorded interviews, the sort of careful but not yet accusatory thing that sends small apprehensions through an office. From HR's preliminary notes, I learned that the investigation would be quiet at first. Rumors in a company become a slow current. I fed that current. I was careful to never write the complaint from my own account. The anonymity preserved plausible deniability. But the complaint had a life of its own. People love to narrate. Within a few days, the rumor trolleyed out that a manager at Ethan's level was showing favoritism. It did not name him. People like filling blanks. Anna felt the change first, as all junior employees do. She got small pointed emails about deadlines and deliverables that suggested oversight. Ethan was nervous. He took calls in closets in stairwells, and I watched the way his shoulders lowered when he thought no one could see. The real art was to make his control feel slippery. I began to subtly unspool the confidence he had in his colleagues. I started to point out contradictions, not to him but in his presence, in an almost shy way, producing facts that suggested he had missed meetings or misremembered dates. He answered with the same good humor. But others saw his small tremors. People interpret nervousness as a sign of weakness, and weakness invites gossip. He was not made for that. The pressure cooker built. Ethan made mistakes. A misfiled document, an abrupt answer in a meeting, a misremembered deadline. HR required a formal review, and in a private meeting that I did not attend, his boss asked pointed questions. He was careful at first, but under pressure he made the fatal error. He contradicted himself in an email. The wording was clumsy. The dates were off by a week. I had watched him craft emails for years, appreciated the little attention to tone that made him get his way. But stress unseats even practiced courtiers. Then I struck the quietest blow. I leaked a photograph, only because he had already leaked it to someone else. It was a picture taken at a casual dinner. Ethan's arm around Anna, both laughing. It had been on his phone, and he had shared it with a friend in a private message, not remembering that the friend forwarded it to another, a chain like a badly tied rope. Someone had uploaded it to a private group chat, and it leaked. I tipped an acquaintance in the company about seeing that photograph in a chat, and the rumor heater roared. The image reached the right circles. When the photograph reached HR, they had more than hearsay. They had visual evidence of a familiarity that suggested impropriety. People began to look at Ethan through a different lens. The man who had been an affable project manager began to seem imbricated in office politics and clandestine exchanges. Naturally, people began to ask questions. Anna was called to a meeting. Ethan was asked to provide an explanation for the photograph. In one of those desperate moments where a person knows he is trapped, Ethan did what time-honored men do. He blamed the context, minimized, claimed it was innocent. But innocence is a brittle thing when a company must preserve its image. The investigation turned clinical, and both their reputations shivered. At home, I watched Ethan pace and gesticulate. He tried to convince me it was all a misunderstanding, that Anna was just a friend, that the photograph was staged. His explanations were perfunctory and, like all lies, came with cracks. When I asked him if he loved me, he paused and chose his words as someone stepping over a slab. He said, "I care about you, Charlotte." He thought that was enough. I did not confront him then. What would victory be if not complete? The office rumor and HR's looming questions were a form of natural penalty. His world, the one he had always used to mask his choices, was becoming brittle. He would have to scramble, to reckon with people who had once smiled at him in corridors. That was the true punishment, to see the machine of his life, the social architecture he had taken for granted, begin to flow away in slow, mortifying increments. But people deserve the opportunity to be better, and sometimes they take it. In the case of Ethan, he reacted like many do. He attempted damage control. He apologized to HR and arranged for a mediated conversation. He tried to repair. In that fragile unmaking, I realized I wanted something more than his apology. I wanted him to understand the shape of his loss. So I staged the most intimate of consequences. I invited him to a dinner. Not an accusation, but in the quiet way of two people who have shared months, years, of life. He came in a suit that had been tailored, and he sat across from me, hands folded, eyes darting like a trapped animal. I told him I was leaving. I had rehearsed the lines without emotion because I had learned the truth, that expressions are less efficient than facts. I said in precise language that I had found messages, that he had betrayed me. My voice was a ledger. He tried to reach for my hand. I did not let him. What I did let him feel was the social repercussion. When I texted a mutual friend one line, "I'm done," the mutual friend replied with warmth and offered support. Within 24 hours, my social presence became a kind of public he had not anticipated. People saw me as the wronged partner, but importantly, they also saw me as composed. My friends rallied. I watched in silent fury as Ethan panicked not because of what he had done, but because of how he would now be seen. Reputation, I realized, is the currency of the petty powerful. He tried to denounce me at first. "You're making a spectacle," he said, voice small and ragged. I agreed that I was making an end. I did not seek to ruin him, but I was done being the unremarked victim. I told him simply that I was going to build a life that did not include him. I did not want him to suffer in a way that destroyed his life. I wanted to be the proof that betrayal does not always end in blood and ruin, that the person who is betrayed can reassemble herself with dignity and in so doing, become untouchable. And yet the world enjoys a tidy conclusion. I chose to leave the company rumors to rot where they were, to let HR conclude with necessary caution. Anna found herself transferred to a different department. The company gave her, in bureaucratic kindness, a new role. Ethan's review was marked with cautionary notes. No one was fired, no legal papers were filed, but small doors closed. He lost projects. People were careful. The social status he had used as a shield eroded into something softer. Suspicion, an inability to take compliments at face value, jokes in meetings that cut too close. I did not relish it. There were nights I felt the want of vengeance in ways I had not anticipated. The most dangerous part of revenge is how it invites you to become the thing you fight against. My measures had been exact because I wanted to avoid that mirror. The revenge had to change my life as little as possible, other than removing him. I wanted the return to be clean. There were residual moments, small and banal. I would see him across a grocery aisle and catch the glance that asked for a reconciliation. Sometimes, he would leave a little note on the doormat, an old habit of his. "Charlotte, can we talk?" I did not answer. I recycled his texts into the space where they belonged, as historical artifacts of a previous version of my life. I took my phone to the pottery class, arranged the shelves at the library, and learned to be alive on my own terms. Victory, finally, came in a way I did not predict. It was not in his public ruin or his private humiliation. It was in the subtle re-anchoring of my own identity. The fact that I could go to the pottery class and concentrate on clay, that I could sit in a well-lit cafe on a Sunday and not bleed inwardly, that friends who had once been peripheral stood with me without making me recite my own humiliation, that was the victory. He had shown me how fragile some people are. I had shown the world that I could be unbroken. The ending is not tidy. Ethan moved cities 6 months later. He sent a single perfunctory message wishing me well. I replied with a generic, "Thank you." Anna apologized once, as if to smooth a wrinkle in a shared shirt. We both accepted the apology the way people accept apologies for trivial, unrecoverable things. It was a kind gesture, but the fabric did not return to its original shape. Sometimes at night I think about crossing certain lines that would have been deliciously final. But the person I have become prefers subtler delights. Reading a book without thinking of a betrayal, drinking coffee at the window and seeing the streeteer pick up his morning paper. I watch couples in parks and feel no tremor. My life is not a vengeance play. It is a new architecture that took months to build. It is, importantly, quieter than spectacle and louder in consequence. There are moments when I wonder if I taught myself cruelty. There are nights when remorse blooms like a small, patient plant. I water it with the thought that I acted like a person reclaiming herself. Had I been cheated on in a world that prizes performances of shock and fury, I might have given Ethan the spectacle he expected. Instead, I chose to reposition the narrative of my life. I became indifferent to his story. That indifference was a kind of victory. If someone asks me whether I would do it again, whether the slow, surgical work of ruin is justified against the pain he caused, I answer, quietly, I would not have it happen in the first place. But given what was, given the way intimacy was betrayed, I would do the same. Because the point of revenge, I learned, was not to make someone hurt more than you, but to make yourself inhabit a world where you do not hurt at all. Charlotte, I am, in the present tense, a woman who learned to measure loss, to convert it into a different kind of strength. The victory is open, because truths have a way of returning in different shapes. I am not a hero. I am not a monster. I am evidence that people can be remade. The man who betrayed me? He is a shade now, an outline that sometimes crosses my periphery, nothing more. And that, finally, feels like the cleanest triumph I could have asked for. I thought I had closed the door, that the hinge had been oiled and sealed. For months afterward, my life felt like a house in which I had finally switched the lights on, every corner visible, no shadows to stumble into. But houses settle, and so do people. The truth is, stories rarely finish when you cut the last line. They breathe, they split, they remap themselves into new rooms. A few weeks after Ethan moved, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a photograph, smaller than the ones that had been circulating, a print on cheap paper. Ethan's arm around Anna, yes, but the angle was different. It included another man in the background, laughing, a face I had not noticed in the city of my anger. He was blurred, as if the photograph had been taken while someone moved. My first reaction was a dull, old heat, possessiveness, the coil of someone recognizing an old hurt. My second reaction was something colder. The face in the background suggested a story I had not anticipated. A third participant. A thread leading backward. I could have thrown the photograph away. Instead, I pinned it to the board above my desk, because the shape of a problem looks different when you see it up close every morning. Over the next days, I found myself returning to it, not with the desire to punish but with the clinical curiosity of someone tracing a map. The face belonged to a man named Victor, a contractor on one of Ethan's projects, a freelance developer who sometimes collaborated with the design team. He had a reputation for charm, a name that meant nothing, a presence that meant access. Why did this matter? Because the narrative of betrayal was seldom as clean as two people with overlapping interests. There are always more people in the margins. Confidants, facilitators, the small co-opting hands that make a private thing public and a public thing intimate. If Ethan had depended on multiple hands to keep his secret, then those hands could also undo the secrecy in ways I hadn't planned. Revenge, even the quiet kind, throws off echoes. I started to watch again, from a distance, with rules I had written for myself. No public scenes, no confrontations, no illegal acts. Just observation. I learned Victor's habits. He favored the same coffee cart on 7th. He liked to talk loudly into his phone about projects as if on speaker. I learned that he was without the architecture of attachment. No long-term partner, an Instagram feed full of transient faces. He could be used, or he could be an unraveling point. The small, sensible part of me wanted to leave it alone. Let them live with their messy lives. But there was another voice, older and more precise, that wanted to fold these new details into the ledger. I let myself follow it. At the pottery studio, my hands found the clay easily. Clay is honest. It gives back the fingerprints you leave on it. In those hours, my mind catalogued conversations overheard at cafes, names that recurred in meeting minutes, a transaction here, a forwarded message there. I built a timeline, not because I planned a spectacle, but because I wanted to understand the pattern of the deception. Patterns reveal motive. What the pattern showed was not just infidelity but a network of small comforts. Ethan had not simply cheated. He had curated an ecosystem that allowed cheating to function like a second job. Anna had been a part of it, yes, but Victor and others had provided the social lubrication. After-work beers, mixed signals, blurred lines that made moral judgment slippery. In the end, there was a difference between someone who actively sought to hurt and someone who accepted comfort when it arrived. Both are culpable, but they are different kinds of culpable. One night I received a message from Anna. Short, precise, and tentative. Charlotte, can we meet? I owe you an explanation. I read it 3 times, then set my phone down. I could have ignored her. I could have filed her in the drawer marked, past. Instead I wrote back, coffee. Saturday. Noon. Library cafe. I chose the library because it was public and quiet, because the geometry of books made it less likely for a scene to erupt. When she arrived, Anna looked younger than the photos suggested. Her hair was shorter, she moved with a careful eagerness, as if she had rehearsed each step into the room. She sat across from me and placed her hands around the cup as if it were fragile. "I know you hate me," she said immediately. "I know I hurt you." She didn't look like a conspirator then. She looked like someone scanning for a ladder out of the hole she had dug. Her voice trembled when she said Ethan's name. "He told me it was over. He told me he was single. He said he was figuring things out." "Did you ask him for proof?" I asked. She blinked. "No. I didn't want to be the one to pry. I told myself I would know if it was real." That was the softest and most terrible sentence. An admission of willful suspension. People do strange, small things when vulnerable. Anna had been aspirational and lonely in a way many young people are. She had not started out to be a weapon. She had found herself wearing one. "You and I are not so different," I said. "We both wanted something to belong to." She looked at me as if trying to memorize my face. For the first time since the discovery, anger softened. I felt the urge to lecture, to put her in the ledger of wrongdoing, but the ledger is not always the place where healing begins. "Did you ever suspect he was married to convenience?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, "Sometimes. But people behave like what they want to be seen as. He was always so careful." "Careful," I repeated, tasting the word. "He was precise but not honest." Anna began to tell me about Victor. The name had been held back like a small secret she did not trust me to carry. "He was at dinners," she said. "He would come and go. Sometimes he would stay late with Ethan and they'd talk about architecture and music and..." Her hands gestured as if she could hold the words. "I thought it was all about work. I didn't realize the shape of what I was inside." Her confession was not an apology. Not really. It was a surrender. I watched her make it and felt something dark and strange. Pity, sharp and unexpected. She was not the architect of the network. She was one of its softest parts, vulnerable to the gravity of someone older and practiced at charm. "I suppose you want me to say something that makes you feel better," she said finally, voice small. "But there's more. Victor. He's not only charming. He has leverage. He lends money, he introduces people. He is someone who can make careers, and he likes to be useful." Useful. The word prickled. I asked her to tell me everything she knew, in the flat voice of someone taking witness. Anna told me about off-the-record dinners, about late-night messages and the way Victor kept his phone on vibrate under the table. She told me about an invoice that had gone missing and a client who had been steered to Victor's freelancer portal. "He always smiles," she said. "But behind the smile is someone who likes having things." When she left, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm. "He gave me this," she said. "I thought you should have it." It was a receipt, inconspicuous, for a transfer from Victor's account to Ethan's. The sums were small but recurring: lunches, reimbursements, consultation fees, the kind of transactions couples hide in plain sight. I looked at it and felt the room tilt slightly. The network had a banknote. Money changes the texture of betrayal. You can forgive passion. You cannot easily forgive purchase. I realized then that my revenge had been a compass pointing at a single heart. But hearts in cities beat in synchrony with accounts and favors and blurred professional boundaries. If Victor had been a node, then perhaps the only honest thing left was to untangle him. I did not want to escalate. My rules still held: no illegal acts, no public spectacles that would crush innocence beyond recognition. But the receipts suggested a new approach: clarity. If there were small traceable things that showed a pattern, then their exposure would not be spiteful. It would be factual. Facts do not lie. They merely reveal. So I began to build a narrative of evidence. Not for vengeance but for truth. I contacted a journalist I had once chatted with at a book launch. An acquaintance whose curiosity was both ethical and sharp. I did not feed them a story. I offered documentation and a suggestion. Look into the network of informal favors in tech design. It sounded in email like the sort of cultural piece that would analyze boundaries, consent, and workplace ethics. The journalist asked to meet. I handed over the receipts, the photograph with the blurred man, and a timeline I had assembled. I watched as an investigator's excitement, ethical, not predatory, Lit someone who loved puzzles. They took notes, they asked questions that made the receipts look less like dirt and more like a pattern. This is systemic, the journalist said. It isn't just a personal betrayal. It's about power. That was the turn I did not expect. My personal story becoming a part of a larger discourse. The article that came out 3 months later did not name me. It did not tear at personal flesh. It was a quiet, hard-hitting piece about the ways networks use favors to shape careers and relationships. But in the footnotes, in the examples, there were particulars that pointed towards a certain company, a certain cluster of freelancers. The readers were smart. They filled in blanks. The company, keen to preserve its image, started an external audit into freelance procurement and declared a review of ethics policies. HR became more than a rumor engine. It became a scrutiny lab. Ethan called me, furious and frightened. "You're making it worse," he said. His voice threaded between anger and fear. "You're ruining people." "I'm making it truer," I said. "I'm making sure it's not only my story." The ripple effect was not clean. Victor lost a few clients, but he did not disappear. He recalibrated, rebranded, and kept moving in a world that services charm. Anna's new role became more stable and less ambiguous. She learned to ask questions she should have asked sooner. Ethan's reputation folded inward like a book a child had bent. He lost some projects. He gained a caution he did not like feeling. No one went to jail. No spectacular collapse occurred. But the scaffolding of casual privilege was weakened. And for me, the consequence was less outward than I had imagined. My name remained unscathed. I had not become a monster. Yet at night, when the city hummed and the clay dried in my studio, I sometimes felt the small, persistent ache of having watched people rearrange themselves around truths I had catalyzed. I had wanted justice. I had delivered a kind of accountability. But accountability is not revenge. Precisely. It is, at its best, a mutual realignment. Sometimes revenge is a lesson. Sometimes it is a prism that shows how betrayal is rarely a single-act crime. It is a function of systems that reward convenience and flattery more than honesty. I had wanted to be the axis of change, and in a small way I was. But the city is not a moral theater. It is a complex organism. People adapt. They reskin their behaviors. The lesson spreads, then adapts. A year later, I ran into Anna again. We passed each other between stacks in the library, both carrying books that smelled of new paper. She smiled in a way that held no apology, no demand. There was a softness now, not of weakness but of someone who had been schooled by consequence. She said simply, "Thank you." I thought of Ethan sometimes, like a name in the margins. Occasionally he would appear in the news as a footnote in industry gossip. A new city, a quieter LinkedIn presence, a profile that suggested reinvention. Reinvention is a privilege, and so is movement. I tried not to be vengeful about his continuing life. I tried to be grateful for mine. If the story continues, and stories do, it will not be because I plotted on a grand scale. It will be because humans are stubbornly recursive. Betrayals will come in other shapes, and I will have to decide again how to answer them. Will I become the woman who calculates, who measures and retaliates? Or will I be the woman who builds, who chooses spaces where honesty is the default currency? Tonight, as I shape a bowl on the wheel, clay spinning under my palms, I think about the balance between action and restraint. I have not finished learning. Neither have the people in my orbit. The victory I once imagined as a single triumphant note has become a continuing chord, complex, unresolved, and strange. An open ending, after all, is not a weakness. It is an invitation. 3 years passed before I saw Ethan again. It was at a gallery opening. One of those minimalist rooms where art is less about color and more about price. I hadn't planned to go. A friend had dragged me along, and I had said yes out of politeness. The space smelled of white wine and ambition. People spoke in the currency of knowing glances. And then there he was. He looked older, but not ruined. His hair shorter, jaw tighter, the kind of face that had learned how to wear regret like a well-tailored coat. When his eyes found mine, time didn't rewind. It simply paused, like a skipped track. He walked over. "Charlotte," he said, soft, testing the sound like he wasn't sure it would still fit. "Ethan." He smiled. Nervous. "You look different." "I am." We stood there in that sterile white room surrounded by strangers pretending to understand abstract paintings. And I realized something strange. I didn't hate him. Not anymore. Hate was a heavy coat I had long since taken off. What I felt instead was distance. Not emotional, but evolutionary. He began talking, as men like him always do, about his new job, the move, the self-improvement books, the therapy. He wanted me to know he had changed. Not for me, but because he wanted me to see him seeing himself. I read that article, he said after a pause. The one about ethics and design. Everyone said it was anonymous, but I knew. I looked at him. Good. It was meant to be recognized. He laughed. Quietly. You always were sharper than I gave you credit for. You always were duller than you thought you were, I replied without venom. Just fact. He looked down at his drink. I guess I deserved that. No, I said. You deserve to learn something. Whether you did, that's your business. He nodded, his smile small and real this time. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I really am. The apology hung between us like a paper lantern. Fragile, unnecessary, already burning at the edges. I believe you, I said. But it doesn't matter. And it didn't. The woman who had once been consumed by betrayal now felt detached. My revenge had not made me whole, but it had built new architecture inside me. Foundations that did not tremble anymore. As he turned to leave, he said, You know, sometimes I think about what you did, all of it. And I can't decide if it was justice or cruelty. Then you've learned something, I said. They're not always different. He left. I watched him go, swallowed by a crowd of polished faces and empty laughter. Later that night, I stood by the river that cut through the city, the same city that had once held all my pain. The wind smelled like rain and car exhaust. Familiar, grounding. I pulled my coat tighter and realized that revenge hadn't made me powerful. It had made me awake. There was a time when I thought justice meant balance. You hurt me, I hurt you, and the world resets. But the truth is quieter and colder. Justice is not symmetry. It's understanding. Revenge changes the world less than it changes you. I had changed. I still volunteered at the library. Still shaped clay with steady hands. Still read people the way others read weather. But there was something else now. A stillness, a clarity that made others slightly nervous when I smiled. People sense when you've been to the darker rooms and come back without fear. Sometimes when I pass by a couple laughing too loudly in a restaurant window, I think about the line between love and control, between devotion and ownership. And I wonder if I crossed that line too. If, in building my vengeance, I became a mirror of what I despised. But then I remember the nights I rebuilt myself from silence. The mornings I woke up without shaking. The steady rhythm of my breathing in the absence of lies. And I know, monsters don't rebuild. They consume. I did not consume. I created. And yet, in some secret private part of me, there's a spark that never went out. Not hatred, just potential. A knowledge of what I am capable of when cornered. The quiet animal. Awake in the dark. If he or anyone ever tried to cage me again, I would not scream. I would simply remind the world that the most dangerous kind of revenge is the one that looks like peace. And when people ask about Ethan now, I smile. Not kindly, not cruelly. Just like someone who remembers a story she already survived. Because I did. I survived him. I survived myself. And in a world built on betrayal, survival is the purest victory there is.